Hello, I'm Claire Poole and welcome to the Climate of Sport podcast, the show in which you get the inside track on all things sport and sustainability globally. Join me every week where I'll be chatting to a special guest about news, opinion and insights on how sport is moving to a more environmentally friendly future or taking action on climate change. Hi everyone and welcome to the Climate of Sport podcast with me, Claire Poole. I am delighted this week to be joined by our special guest, Julie Duffus, Olympic Movement Sustainability Senior Manager for the International Olympic Committee. Julie, it's wonderful to have you with us.
Hi Claire, and it's amazing to be here with you. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this podcast.
It's a pleasure. First of all, we always start off the podcast with a little bit of background about you. So for people who don't know, tell us your journey in terms of being in this role at the IOC. Where did you start and how did that come through in terms of the role you're doing?
Of course, I could talk for hours on this, but I'll try and summarize it in a few minutes. So, my background actually is in environmental and social impact assessments. And when I was basically at school and thinking about during my degree what I wanted to do, I became very passionate about pollution, actually polluting the world, where we were going, sustainability. But at the time, and I'm showing my age now, at the time, people were like, what would you want to do that for? Like, don't you want to be a doctor or something like that? So, but anyway, I was focused on this. So I did a master's in pollution management at Imperial and was very interested in the kind of big hitters. So like the oil industry, mining, etc. So that's where I started my career, actually. And I did a lot of impact assessments for oil and gas and mining around the world. And then during that time, well, this is probably about 15 years later, actually, there came up the opportunity to write the impact assessments for the London 2012 bid. So we put in, the consultancy firm I was working for at the time, put in a bid basically to win that work, not particularly expecting to win it. And we did. So it was like, oh, we better suddenly switch to sports and looking at what the Olympics was. And really my history behind that was just enjoying watching the Olympics on TV. My sport is equestrian, so I always stayed up in the middle of the night to watch equestrian from when I was little. And that was really how I knew the Olympics. But we won this bid, and that then took us full time for 2 years working on the Olympic bid and doing the social and environmental impact assessments and the planning applications. So by the time we'd finished the 2 years, the documents like as high as my house written on this. And then we won the bid, which was amazing. I can still remember that day. And then actually after that, I went back to my normal job of working in impact assessments. And then David Stubbs, who I know you know, who was the head of sustainability at London 2012, actually said, do you want to come back and work for London 2012, LOCOG, in my sustainability team? So I, of course, grabbed the chance because I thought, when else will there be a home games, in my country? And what an amazing opportunity, even though it was something quite different to what I was used to doing. So I did. And then I worked there with David Stubbs and the team for 4 years. And then after that, I kind of assumed that I would go back to my previous role. And I thought, no, I need a break because it is just so intense and exhausting working for an Olympic Games. So I basically took some time off. And then while I was traveling, Tanya, who was basically the head of legacy, accessibility and sustainability in Rio 2016, phoned me up and said, do I want to go and work for Rio? And I thought, well, you know what? I've never been to Brazil, so why not? So off I went to Brazil and worked as the head of sustainability for Rio 2016. And it's funny because then when I came to the end of that, I was like, well, what do I do now? I'm kind of like, I've been in sport for a while now. Do I go back to what I was doing or what do I do? And the Olympics is just so emotional. It brings out so many emotions, and you spend like sort of many years with this team around you working intense hours and time, and then suddenly it's just gone. And everybody in, the event industry must have this same feeling, but it's something like, I left Brazil and I was like, gosh, what do I do now? So I spent some time traveling around South America, and then I had a conversation with the IOC. And the IOC at the time had just written their sustainability strategy. And as I think it's based on the 3 spheres. And the third sphere, which is working outwards with the Olympic movement, so sport essentially, was something that the IOC had not really done in sustainability before. But I had spent the last 4 years at Rio 2016 sort of saying, as the IOC, we need to support these sports more. So I sort of, in a way, almost talked myself into that role. So then after that, after Rio, I went to work for the International Committee in Switzerland, which is where I am now. And voila.
Et voila. And so you've been there
5.5 years.
5.5 years. Wow.
Since Rio, basically, yeah.
So before we go on to talk about sort of what you're doing at the IC and the roles, just tell me about that feeling that the day you won the bid after all of that work that had gone into it. You must remember it really clearly. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in Covent Garden and it was announced, and I think it was a feeling of a mixture of intense relief, but excitement, but also like, gosh, we've got to deliver this. Like London, UK has got to deliver this. And I kind of knew what was coming. And I had spent those 2 years walking around that area in London. And, let's face it, it was a very different space in London as it is now. Yeah. And there were some parts of that area where I was walking around on my own and I didn't even feel particularly safe, to be honest. And I thought, how? Like I could see the end vision, but how we were going to get there was just like immense. So all of these feelings sort of came around, but also at the bottom of that was an immense pride, because I think I've always been like, a firm British kind of supporter and patron, and I guess the pride came out of it as well. But and quite a lot of champagnes later, I think I was feeling happy.
That's good. It's great to hear the reflections on that, because we don't often hear that side of things. I think often we hear about, even when we're looking at the World Cup this year or, Olympic Games or whatever, we think about what's happening in and around the time it happens. And a lot of people don't think about the fact that it's been a decade in the making in terms of bids and then rolling things out, etc. It's, they're long projects. So it's really interesting to hear reflections on that stage so much further back.
Yeah, it's a really long stage. And now the stage has almost got longer, in fact, because there's the interested city part where we start actually working with these host countries. And that's before you've even decided that you're going to put a bid in. There's a huge amount of work that goes on before that. Yeah. So it's a long time, it's a long investment. And I guess when you work in that, that's the part you see.
Yeah.
And the sort of the 3 weeks at the end of it is, I guess, like the little cherry on top. But underneath that is just so much work and preparation, which you're right, so many people don't appreciate actually what goes into watching a sport event on TV.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm conscious not to go down a rabbit hole, as we said, both of us probably will do, but just I think that just a final point, really, not to delve into too deeply, but I think that is sometimes, especially with mega sports events, where people have feedback on them, not realizing the decisions have been made of how they're going to work a decade earlier. And especially around sustainability, things are moving in the last 2 or 3 years very quickly, and ourselves included, expectations are very high about what something could look like. But actually, not to give mega sports events a pass, that we always need to be better, we need to be more environmentally friendly, we need to keep pushing on that. But I think it's useful for people to remain cognizant about that a lot of these decisions are made about where and how, etc., possibly a decade earlier than when we start talking about them from a sustainability perspective externally.
Exactly. And you and I know, because we work in this space, how fast sustainability is moving right now.
Yeah.
I mean, things that we were talking about only a couple of years ago, we've moved on so much from them. So it's actually quite difficult, I would say now, to write a bid with that future lens on it, because we're moving so fast.
Yeah.
And a lot of our, as you know, like we've actually got host cities now even further in advance. So LA and Brisbane. Brisbane, I keep on thinking it's just around the corner. Actually, it's 2032, and I'll probably be thinking about retiring at that point. So
2032, especially sometimes, when you think about all of us working towards, reduction emissions by 2030, etc. I mean, as you said, 5-6 years ago, and when the sport and sustainable space globally started to galvanize, 2030 seems like a long way away now. I mean, we're around the corner from 2023. It's looming, and then we're looking at games past that already.
Yeah, and I'm sure the older you get, the faster time goes. So that's just like around the corner.
Yeah, I know that from my grandma, who is 92, and is like, wait till you get to a stage where your grandkids are telling you the time goes fast. Then you're really old. Anyway, enough about mine now. So it's great to hear about the journey through it. So then tell us, as you said, there's these 3 pillars in terms of limit, one of which is sustainability. And there's so much, even that we talk about, that you work on around there. So there's the games, obviously, themselves that you're involved with, but then also working with athletes, working with federations, there's so much, the UN Sports for Climate Action Framework, etc. Give us a little overview of the kind of projects or the, sort of areas of passion that you're working on at the moment in terms of within that sustainability pillar of the IOC.
Well, my core work, as you like, is actually supporting the Olympic movement. So the Olympic movement consists of all the Olympic international federations, the recognised international federations, the National Olympic Committees, of which there's 206 around the world. And then I also work with the ambassador program for athletes, so the sustainability ambassadors for that. So that's my sort of core role. But then you have to break that down and say, actually, what does sport need in order to move forward in sustainability? And that actually is a broad spectrum of things that sport needs to progress. And so when I break it down, I look at actually opportunities to support those international federations, national Olympic committees, and the athletes. And that involves a lot of things. So you mentioned the UN Sports Climate Action Framework, for example. So partnerships for me is really key, because there is just me doing this role, and that's a lot of sport which I need to support. I can't do that on my own. So it's like at the same part of my job is looking at the partnerships role on how we're going to deliver this, not just in Europe, but worldwide, because how we deliver things, in the UK or Switzerland is very different to how we're going to deliver it in places like Papua New Guinea, for example. And how do we as the IOC support the Pacific Islands versus USA versus Canada versus UK? It's very different. It's very evolving. And I just need to continually on a day-to-day adapt to that. Sometimes that's a challenge, because sometimes I can, be talking to one National Olympic Committee and we're really delving into Scope 3 emissions, for example. And then I'll have a conversation with a very small island nation. And it's like, actually, how do I get them moving in sustainability when they themselves are being so heavily impacted in their own day-to-day lives? We have a lot of athletes, for example, who have been at the games and lost their homes, and I just have to adapt to that. So that's a lot of, basically my job is just finding ways to support sport to do more in sustainability, but at the same time protecting them and making them more resilient, and their athletes more resilient to the changing climate. And how do we do that as well? So a mixture.
And it's great to hear the insights across all of that, but how can you explain a bit about how that support manifests? Is it like training, financial support, educational support, resources, all of these things and more? How does that sort of support tend to manifest in order to be helpful to IFs, to NOCs, to athletes, sort of in a hands-on, real way?
Well, it's all of that. I mean, first of all, there has to be a mapping. So it's literally a one-on-one sitting down with that sport organisation and saying, where's your journey at the moment? Where are the gaps? Where are you struggling? Like, do you have the resources to do that? And I'm not just talking about financial, I'm also talking about time and educational side of it as well. So once you've got that, then it's working out, okay, how many other sport organisations are in the same situation? Have we got some which are along the same journey that I can group together? Or do we have some sports which are facing the same challenges? Like, so the mountain sports are facing the same challenges for climate change, for example, or some are facing more challenges in air pollution. So it's about grouping them as well. So there's a lot of one-to-one support, but then there's group support, and it's amazing actually how much sport I think works in silos a lot as well. So it's actually bringing people together, which is really important, because the more that they can support each other as sport organisations within topics that are interesting for them, then the more they can learn from each other and support each other. So there's a bit of that. There's of course the sort of like bog standard, writing guides, giving workshops on topics, thematic workshops. That is a core point of what I do as well. And then there's bringing partnerships. So it's what can partnerships do? Because I'm sitting in Switzerland, I'm not sitting, for example, in the Pacific, but some of our partners are sitting there, and they know what the challenges are in that region. So how can we maximize those partnerships and support them on a more regional and national sense? And then the funding, yes. So we have Olympic Solidarity. I mean, at the IOC, about 98% of our funds go back out to supporting sport. So, I mean, we're non-for-profit, so most of it goes back out, and it goes back out to where sport needs it. So, for example, we have an Olympic Values Programme where sustainability falls into. So I would take climate, for example. So take the UN Sports for Climate framework. If an NOC joins that, I will spend a bit of time on a one-on-one with them, mapping out their scope, their risks, their opportunities, the situation nationally where they're sitting at. And then they may say, okay, we need a specific carbon consultant to come in to do our baseline mapping. And then we would fund that. So we fund sort of specific projects, as long as it has that kind of strategic, we're moving forward on the same path, kind of together direction. If
Nice.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think it's great to hear a little bit more for people who aren't, familiar with the mechanisms, etc. It's great for them to hear about that support for international federations, athletes, national Olympic committees, etc. as well. So you're in quite a unique role globally, dealing with so many federations, so many national Olympic committees around sport that are active in this area, athletes, etc. I'd love to get your perspective through that work, both within your role at the IOC, but also what you see within federations, within NOCs, with athletes, in countries. Your kind of macro view of the industry in terms of, sustainability in sport, as we said, has ramped up massively in the last few years, in no small part because of the UN Sports for Climate Action framework and more mainstream media coverage. The fact we're having more and more obviously climate related events, etc., globally, that's impacting us. So we're seeing this rise now. But from your position, which I think actually is a very unique position to answer this because of the kind of visibility over these organizations and from a global level, do you see trends in terms of challenges we're facing or barriers that we have to overcome to do more?
Absolutely. And the trends are global trends. They may be dealt with in slightly different ways or in slightly different scales, but they're the same core challenges that we are facing as sport. They may be slightly different in terms of one sport may suffer from flooding more, one sport may suffer from fires more, or poor air quality. We're still talking about the environment and sport suffering from that. And then the other side of it is that how the challenges of how we reduce, for example, our emissions, they're the same. They may be on a completely different scale, but fundamentally they're the same. We've all got the same challenges with Scope 3. we are all in that situation. Whoever you speak to across the globe, we're in that situation. And a lot of the answers we don't have. So I think it's coming together and working out how to do that. There's some specific challenges, I think. I mentioned islands earlier because they've been on my mind. But, how does an island sport organisation that may have like 5 people working for them, and in a country where over 90% they import, how are they going to reduce by 50% by 2030? These are all challenges which I think a lot of us face, but just been dealing with it in slightly different ways. But the trends, 10 years ago, when I used to say what I did for a job, people would kind of, when you say it at a dinner party, people go quiet, sort of go, oh. And they sort of associated sustainability. It used to be with, saving rabbits and trees. And then it moved to recycling paper. Then it moved to reducing plastic bottles. And I feel like actually people now in sport are beginning to really understand what sustainability means, and the breadth of it. And for me, that's quite exciting because I feel like I've been alone in this space for many years. And there's more and more of us.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel like that. We see that a lot when people come to the summit, etc., and they're just one person and they're just so delighted to be with other people and talk about these challenges and these issues because, they're one person inside an organization and they can talk to others about it, but they don't really get it. So that isolation, I guess, within the role is like common for sure. Those broader trends in terms of the challenges make perfect sense. But what about the more, if you're chatting to federations or NOCs that maybe, as you said, have got 5 people in them and you're talking to them about, this is something that should be prioritized. What are the barriers? What is there pushback there? Are people excited to get across it? Do they see it's just another thing to do? Tell us about the reactions that sometimes happen when you do start talking to some of these, especially the smaller, less well-funded organizations you work with.
It's funny because this comes up a lot, actually. And I do not necessarily agree, actually, that those smaller ones who have very little resources struggle with getting it. Actually, I find the opposite in a way, actually. And it just depends on the people. It depends on the people and it depends on their top management massively.
Yeah.
So if you've got an engaged top management and you've got someone who really holds that passion internally, even though they may not know anything about this topic, if they are passionate about it, even if there's 5 of them, they will find ways to implement it and do it. They will reach out, they will grab all the partnership opportunities and funding that they can, and they will make it happen.
Yeah.
And actually, that is often easier than grappling with an organization that's been there forever and have hundreds of staff, a top management that's not engaged.
Yeah.
That's a very difficult conversation and it takes a long time to get through that. So I don't really think that that's really representative of how they deal with sustainability, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. And I think I'm really interested because I think small doesn't necessarily mean engaged and big doesn't necessarily mean disengaged, does it? I'm sure there's a whole myriad of size and interest and passion. And I'm just really curious because I think, I think we often talk about the challenges and I know we should be focusing on opportunities, but the reason we talk about trends around challenges and how we can remove barriers to do more is that I would say from my perspective and where I sit in the industry, there's a lot more conversations about challenges to making commitments around climate change rather than opportunities. It's something we need to change the narrative on for sure. And I think there's a lot of really energetic people in the space who are doing that. But I would say from my position broadly, we get tabled with the challenges more so than the opportunities. And that's why it's always interesting to hear, the barriers that we have to overcome. And I do think there's a massive role there for all of us and an organisation to change that into opportunities, whilst being very key that we are not trying to take advantage of the climate crisis. We're not trying to profit off the climate crisis. We're simply saying a lot of these organisations, federations, even if they're not for profits, are run like businesses because your accounts have to tot up and you have to have enough money to pay people and achieve things. So we want people to see it as an opportunity. And I know a good friend of yours and someone I've connected with recently from the Spanish Olympic Committee have done that in terms of, connecting marketing and sustainability in their commercial team really, really effectively to connect the dots on that. And it's that, I guess I'm just trying to get to is that, where do you think we are across people seeing it as challenges versus opportunities, or, where we are in terms of this journey of where we need to get to versus where we are right now?
Well, where we are along the journey of where we need to get to, I think is almost impossible to answer, because I think it's changing almost weekly. We don't know how climate change is going to impact us. We have a rough idea, but we don't know precisely. There's so much of science that we don't know yet. There's even, we were talking about scope 3. There's just so much that we don't know yet, really, in innovation and research coming through. So I find it hard to answer that question of where we are on the journey, because I think it's a sort of always changing end path. I would say, though, that we have, and when I say we, I'm talking about sports sector, have progressed a lot, even in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
The amount of people, I remember when I first spoke to you, Claire, about like the Sport Positive Summit. We were talking about, we knew everyone in the space. We were talking about a relatively small amount, and that has grown massively, even in the last 5 years. It's been amazing. So I think we are really progressing well, but we have a long way to go. There's no doubt about that. Versus opportunities and challenges, I could not agree more. Everybody talks about challenges all the time. It's like whenever I pick up the phone and talk to a sport organization, it's always about, well, I face this challenge, or I can't do this because of this. And I really wish we could flip this narrative and actually look at it as opportunities. And people like Manuel from the Spanish Olympic Committee, I think, can really help show people the opportunity actually that sustainability brings. And, people often say, I don't have the resources. Actually, time and time again, we are seeing that embedding sustainability is not going to cost you resources. Actually, it's going to grow that resources. And we showed, going back to London 2012, we proved that there as well. The actual money that we brought in was massive compared to the input that we put in. So time and time we're just saying this, but unless you're in that space and you're understanding that, I get it. I can see from, outside of our space, it's like that will cost money and time. But people need to just break that seal, I think, and just see it definitely as an opportunity. So 100% agree with you.
Yeah, I think just a couple of points on that as well from my side. I think, one, we know there's money in sport. There's no query about there being in sport. I think the big for me, a big future challenge of continuing the momentum on it is some of that money being funneled in different ways than it currently is. And that's a huge mindset, and it's a huge behavioral shift, and it's probably a whole shift of economics and business. But I think that's one of our next challenges. But also I think Norman Voschelter, who is from the Philadelphia Eagles, who's been on a previous podcast, and he'll speak at the summit as well, who's very energetic in this space. On the podcast I recorded with him, which people can listen to, and it's incredible. He's awesome. We had a conversation about the opportunity, and he was like, Claire, if people's first question is, what is it going to cost me? You've lost already. Like, people need to see this as, how can we be more innovative? How can we connect with more great partners? How can we get new minds thinking on this? What are the opportunities for the organization? How can we continue to smash it on the field and do more and more outside as well? And I think it should be what all of us are doing, and all of us are thinking all the time. But actually, when you hear someone like that, it's incredibly refreshing to think we don't know everything. This is quite difficult, but why don't we try and use the platform we've got to bring in the best minds to help us with it, to chat to our partners about how they can help, to think about how we can integrate new innovations. Let's do that then, and let's see how that works, rather than thinking, oh God, this as well now, and seeing it as another job to do, something else to add on a cost. It's that mind shift. And I don't know, I don't have the answer apart from just pure grit of repeating ourselves until everyone gets bored and dies. But I think there has to be a change of mindset around that if we are going to tackle this crisis well within the sport industry.
I Yeah, I think though that I'm seeing a definite increase in people like that.
Mm.
And you're right, it is so refreshing. If I speak to a sport organization and they'll come in and they'll say exactly that, like, right, what are the opportunities and how can I do this, blah, 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 you know that they're going to succeed.
Yeah.
Versus the ones that I speak to who are exactly as you say, how much is it going to cost,
Yeah.
And you know that will be a bit of a constant battle for many years to come. But actually, as my role, I have to deal with both, and that's just the way it is. And there are ways though to change the mindset of those that start in that negative sphere, definitely. And I think actually that's what's quite nice about sport, that there are many different carrots that you can use. One of them being competitiveness, and the wanting to win, the wanting to be the best sport organization.
Yeah.
You can kind of capitalize a bit on that and change that mindset. But yeah, it's for us who work in it, it can be a bit of a slog.
Yeah, but I think that competitive spirit, I think I've had feedback, we do sport positive leagues, and because of just sharing a huge amount of information in a more digestible way, we do league tables because it's football that we work in. It makes perfect sense. And I've had, feedback over the years of like, the climate crisis is too big an issue to compete on. We have to collaborate. And I could not agree more, because there's so much collaboration that's happening. But also, I don't feel as though we have to worry about shying away from being competitive on this as well, because it's sport. If you're working in music and culture and arts, it's very different. But sport is literally about competitiveness. And I think, to your point, let's use that to our advantage. We are all working collaboratively. We have got the UN Sports for Climate Action Framework. We all meet at different summits around the world, and we connect on video meetings and do all of that good stuff. There's so much collaboration happening, but let's not shy away from that competitive angle, because it can help us.
I think it's both. It needs to be partnerships and as you said, a bit of the competitive angle, because that's what sport's about.
Yeah, collaborative competitiveness.
Exactly.
That's my really long, real, like, get your mouth around that word lifetime. Collaborative competitiven's. That's what we need to be doing.
I think that could be our new slogan.
There you go. Checks in the mail. I think there's so much around it, but I think these barriers to come and what we need. What do you think? Again, I've sort of mentioned a couple that I think, from my perspective, things we need to see next. From your side, as you said, we've come so far. We are at the start of this journey. When you think of how many sports organizations there are globally, how many have made commitments, how many have taken action. Whilst we need to celebrate how far we've come, I think we're all in agreement that we are barely touching the sides on this yet. And if we're in a marathon, we're not feeling the lactic acid yet. But within that mindset, though, what do you think we need to see next in terms of trying to drive this forward, maybe at a greater pace?
Well, there are those still. I know that I've said that we are progressing, but there are those in sport who actually have not progressed very well at all.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name and shame them, but of course. But
they know who they are.
There are some which haven't even got a sustainability strategy. They're not monitoring and reporting publicly. This is, to me, basic core stuff that all of sport, whatever size organization, needs to have a strategy and a plan, and they need to be accountable and transparent on that plan.
Yeah.
So that's like bread and butter, what needs to happen. Yeah. But then I think we need to start really progressing outside of us as sport organizations and do a few things. One of them is that we need to engage a lot more with our suppliers. We don't do that enough. We'll pick one-off projects that we will engage with, our sports supplier or sole supplier on something and try and push innovation, but we're not doing it in a proper collaborative sort of like way forward to push the industry as a whole, because as sport, we rely a huge amount on suppliers.
Yeah.
So if you look at the Olympic Games, we're talking about millions of items procured. So we've got to find a way, I think, to come together and look at this collaboratively to push the industry as a whole across the supply chain. Another thing which I think may be a little bit unique to the IOC, but actually I don't believe it should be, is starting to work and push governments. So there's a huge amount, I think, that sport can do to put sport on the agenda of governments and show what sport and sustainability can do on a national scale.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about social and environmental sustainability here.
Yeah.
And actually, I think sport has a huge role to actually look at the policy side of it. Mm-hmm. Instead of looking at ourselves and our organization and the little sphere that we're in, we should actually be pushing back to government and national policy side to actually change things, because then you're going to see change across the board.
Yeah.
So for me, there's of course there's some things in sport which we're amazing at. We need to be more amazing at, actually, but things like reaching people, the advocacy side. But I think that we should be talking about beyond that now.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like on my thoughts. Basically.
Yeah. I mean, it's so great. And I think the policy side and the governmental side for sure. And I think, again, there's very few governments. I was looking at this recently, and, France with their 15-point environmental plan that's been in place since like 2017 when they work with WWF is great. UK, very little. Scotland actually have made probably more commitments than the UK more broadly in terms of its government. There's very few governments globally that are really, vice versa, leveraging the power of sport to help them reach their, they've got nationally determined contributions in terms of what they're going to abate going forward as part of the Paris Agreement. And it seems like such an obvious play to work with sport on that to reach citizens and drive behaviour change, but there just seems to be very little. And I think the conversations I have around that are sport, the people I know in sport and I talk to about that are kind of waiting for government to approach them around it, and vice versa. And I think, how do we catalyse that more? Because I think you're right. I think there's maybe a hesitancy in sport that they're concerned about being mandated to do certain things, but then that is going to come, regulations are going to come sooner or later, because as we said, we've said many times before, if we think about the climate crises that we've had just this year, and we're in a 1.1 degree world, and we're trying desperately to stay below 1.5, but we're on track for 2 degrees. And the way the extreme heat in LA this week, the monsoon in Pakistan that's nearly wiped out, whatever, a third of the population displaced. It's like what we're living through is wild, and it's a 1.1 degree world. There's no doubt that governments are going to mandate organisations to take action, and that's why, for us, why our work is around sport getting ahead of it, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And it's for me, it's like change or be changed, and I think the same applies for sport. And I think we should be ahead of the game, at the front pack in your marathon.
Yes, thank you.
Lagging behind.
Yeah.
Totally agree. And the sooner the better. I mean, the sooner the better for regulations. I mean, you're talking to a sustainability person. So if, all the governments around the world came out tomorrow with tough regulations, I'd be like, yes.
Yeah, but that's it. I do think it's a really interesting, and even if you national government, even if you look at, federations to clubs or whatever, it's a double-edged sword, because I think we do a lot of work in football, and they say, oh God, I hope we don't get mandated to do this stuff, because that'll be a lot. But then also there's if we were mandated to do it, there'd be no choice. We have to do it. So there'd be no, can we resource, what can we do? It's the same as other regulation. You just have to do it. So you get on and do it. And I think there is a sort of double-edged sword of people being worried about that, but also sort of thinking, well, if that happened, that actually wouldn't be the end of the world, because we'd have to do it. That would be what it is.
Yeah, but I think this goes to your earlier point of, we wish that sport would change that narrative and saying, oh God, there's regulations. Actually, what can sport do to push that regulation? Yeah. Let's get ahead of the game. If there's a European ban on pesticides, which they're talking about now in sport, instead of thinking, what do we do? Let's we need to do this, whether it comes in place or not. Let's start pushing innovation and research and development into getting rid of some of these substances. There needs to be this mind shift to actually seeing it as an opportunity versus panic, like a regulation may come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Changing that. I think what's come through from me in chatting to you in this podcast is this change of mindset. in various different ways around the power of that in all these different things that we're talking about and going forward. And I think what's great is people in sport have that ability, because most of them are interested in sport. They are competitive. They have that within them. So I think that's a really interesting sort of takeaway from our discussion. So just to finish off on, because I'm conscious of time, we've kind of spoken about your hope for the future in terms of sport and sustainability, of what you'd like to see next. But just, I guess, I'm always conscious of who's listening to this podcast and maybe them being earlier on in the journey of their own development around sport and sustainability. So if you had one bit of advice to offer those people, either at the start of the journey or people who just need to be G'd up to keep going because, they maybe haven't got the buy-in internally, or they're having these challenges or whatever. What's your kind of takeaway, hope, advice for the future for them?
I think if they're struggling with themselves, I always, because I do. There's every day that there are struggles of some sort or other, and it's knowing that you're not alone. Like, if anyone is listening to this saying, I'm struggling in my own organisation to push sustainability, you are not alone. I think everybody struggles at some point or another in sustainability. It's across, actually, not just the sports sector, across all of our sectors, and to reach out to any of us, because I really believe that actually sport coming together more will help progress this faster, and we can create and fill those gaps together and confront those challenges together instead of in silos on our own. So I think that's my one ask, is just start the journey, or if you're on the journey and struggling, reach out. Doesn't matter to any of us, because we're all in it together. And I really believe in the sustainability sector that we're also willing to support each other as well.
Absolutely.
I think in terms of the sustainability space, it's not about actually competitiveness. It's about actually coming together and doing it together.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Yeah. And we'll do it. I just to build on that, we'll do a shout out of, the IOC, UN Sports for Climate Action Framework, SANSI, BASIS, Sport Environment Alliance, Green Sport Alliance. There's so many organisations there who can help. So just to finish on Julie's point in terms of reaching out, to individuals, to organisations, there is plenty of people working in this space now who can help. So a great place to finish. Julie, and thanks a million for taking the time to join us on the pod.
Always a pleasure, Claire.
Oh, fabulous. So for everyone listening, thank you for joining us today. And as a reminder, that was Julie Duffus, Olympic Movement Sustainability Senior Manager for the International Olympic Committee. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Climate of Sport podcast. Please like and subscribe, and get in touch if you want to share information about the work that you're doing, if you want to appear as a guest, or you want to recommend guests, or you just have ideas of conversations you'd like us to have. You can get in touch by emailing info@sportpositivesummit.com.